Okay, CEOs are worried, and we've got a picture of one right here. CEOs are worried. What are they worried about? Well, interestingly enough, only 21% predict revenue growth over the next year or so.
So that's PwC's 12th annual.
PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Yep, PricewaterhouseCoopers, their 12th annual survey of CEOs, and CEOs clearly are worried about the future. In fact, the CEO of eBay said, if I can get 3 good nights sleep in the next year, it will be a success.
Yeah, we got that quote and another one, because there's some other really interesting things. That's the eBay CEO. Now, what's the next quote was, or that 50% of CEOs say government and business can't mitigate current risks from global trends.
Yeah, I think that what we've seen with the current economic conditions and the global crisis is that we're sitting on a ticking time bomb, and these CEOs are literally trying to stay afloat. And not doing such a great job about it. So when the integrity index comes out next year, as Warren Buffett says, look, when the tide goes out, you can see who's not wearing their clothes, right?
Yeah.
So.
And let's go to the last quote on this page, or the last statement on this page. If we can go to that. Oh no, here we are. This is what I want to do. Let's go to what President Obama and his statement to Wall Street the other day, because it's very interesting. The response to him from the head of LPL, let's go to that one. It was more of a lecture. There weren't too many points to applaud. It was kind of painful. Congress, and this is an important statement I think, Congress is not going to tackle financial reform this year. There is too much on the plate. Is he saying in code that this gives me time to rape and pillage?
Well, I think that's what I hope the Institute will do next year, is stop the rape and pillage, because it will become glaring evident as to who doesn't have their clothes on as the tide goes out. What he's saying is Sarbanes-Oxley was a miserable and we didn't fix it with regulation last time. They're not really sure, because of the diverse nature and the intensity of these credit default swaps, exactly how to fix it. But
well, there's regulation, and then there's regulations that are enforced. Is it more of an enforcement issue than a regulation issue?
Well, unfortunately, laws get driven many times in the aftermath of these things. But let's face it, I mean, we're just now sort of finalizing the details of settlements on Enron, and that was 8 years ago. And so regulation is a punitive kind of thing, right? It didn't work. So what we're going to do is create self-regulation, because the minute you put a glaring number on a company, and what we found is 100% of the companies that score 453 or below ultimately commit securities fraud. So the self-regulation will come when CEOs are fearful that their number is less than 453, and the world's going to ask them all sorts of questions about what's going on.
So instead of coming through regulation, you're actually saying that the index has a better chance of bringing about reform itself.
Yeah, it's like having everybody's credit score right out there. Now, we're not a credit rating agency, but we are going to do ratings. And
peer pressure.
Yeah, peer pressure, exactly. That's exactly right. The analysts, and the very thing that institutional investors invest in is the confidence in the CEO. Well, if it comes out that the CEO, we're predicting securities fraud in this case, ultimately their performance will not be sustainable. Now, we're going to use it a little differently than this, but.
Evidence of CEO worry. Let's go to that slide, because this is all about what's been happening and how it's going to, well, let's see, we're not quite there yet. It's a slide that says evidence of CEO worry. It's a slide about fraud. There we are, fraud litigation. It was pretty high in 2002, high again in 2004, dipped down, and now it's on the way back up.
Yeah, so this is out of Stanford University. It actually is the number of cases of securities fraud litigation, and you can see that we're on the rise again. We're hitting sort of post-Enron times again.
You know, we've talked an awful lot about Enron. Let's kind of go to that, and let's kind of talk about what it was that happened that was predicted, and then how we can talk about other companies. So there we are, Enron right there. And
so this is actually Enron's ratings under our integrity index using Bruce's model. And remember, Enron was an Arthur Andersen client. So the model shows, and what's interesting is CalPERS, which is the California Public Employees Retirement System, which is now headed up, their chief investment officer is Joe Deere, who used to be Washington State Investment Board's chief investment officer. You can see those 2 times in 1993 and 1998, CalPERS is committed to invest over $750 million in Enron in these side partnerships, these off-the-balance sheet partnerships, not even in Enron stock, at the two points at which Enron was lowest in their integrity index, and CalPERS should have been nowhere near investing in partnerships with Enron.
Now, the integrity index didn't exist at that time. It was just something that Dr. Bueno de Mesquita, Mesquita had developed for Arthur Andersen, and they weren't telling.
Yeah, they weren't telling, and they didn't want to know, really, because they couldn't deny.
Well, okay, so Enron was bad, very bad, and we learned an awful lot from that, right? I mean, isn't Enron biased? I mean, here we've got this great company now, GE, imagination at work. What is this? $170 billion market cap lost?
Yeah, so about 3 weeks ago, GE paid a $50 million securities fraud penalty to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And actually, they spent $200 million in fees. Now, they say legal fees, but it could have been accounting fees. But clearly, the bigger loss to investors is from the time that the investigation was announced to the time it was settled, $170 billion in market capitalization was lost.
So if you were an investor, but let's define investor. If you were a retirement system of some kind or a pension fund, you're the people who were retirees lost.
Yeah, it isn't you and I that might get on our E-Trade account and actually invest, $100 here or $100 there. We're talking a massive amount of wealth that is lost in these companies. I mean, President Obama talked about $7 trillion lost as a result of this global economic crisis by you and I. But it's our retirement, right? The little guy, it's the teachers that lost an enormous amount of money, and of course their retirements are down 40 and 50%. So if you're close to retirement, you can't recover.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you better work a little bit longer or not live as long. Isn't that an awful thing to say? Well, if GE doesn't tickle your fancy, maybe waste management will. There we are, 1992 to 1997, predetermined earnings. What that means is that the earnings were determined, and then somehow the books made sure that those earnings were there.
Yeah, so that's oftentimes the case. In fact, under Jack Welch, GE hit its quarterly earnings 64 quarters in a row, which is statistically impossible. Wow. So that's what is happening in these companies, right? Because they're managing to the earnings, which is the problem, because that's what they have to then meet. And so that's where the securities fraud becomes a problem.
Can we go back to that slide? Because that slide, the waste management slide, will show some other things too. In mid-1997, the new CEO required an accounting review, and that caused earnings drop for that 5-year period by $1.7 billion. That's a huge amount of money. So, and investors lost $6 billion. That, I mean, from a percentage basis, I mean, an investor had to lose so much there.
They did, but we predicted it. The model would have predicted it in 1993.
Really?
Yeah, so that's the key. The power of this model is to actually show investors in a clear and concise way, and more importantly, CEOs, so that they can understand where there's an exuberance of self-interest within the company.
All right, now we're going to take a very short break. We're talking with Lynn Brewer of the Integrity Institute, integrityinstitute.com. We're right about now to get to the point where you're going to find out how this all comes to being, how it is that the Integrity Institute can take its integrity index and predict what's going to happen with corporate performance. But we got to go back in history just a little.